Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar. My name is Sean, and this is my partner, Ryan. We are here to talk about co-parenting, and we're here to give you guys strategies. We're here to talk about how to reduce conflict, how to be able to communicate with your ex-spouse or while you're going through your separation as well. And we're really excited to have this amazing conversation with you moving forward. The major thing that we really want to talk about is how we can come up with a parenting plan that is going to be for the best interest of your children and as well for you guys as well. And so we're really excited to have you. Ryan, do you want to say anything quickly, or do you want to just dive in?
I'm Ryan.
Okay, well, Ryan, why don't we start with giving a little bit of an overview of what the law says and how we're going to go about that. And actually, before we say that, sorry, I should interrupt, but there is a Q&A button, and there are ways that you guys can ask questions through the chat to us. We are going to spend some time through this session talking about some of those questions that you might have. But for the most part, we are going to be talking about some of the law and some of the arrangements that we see from time to time. But we would love to get some feedback from everybody here, and we can answer some of those questions while we go through the seminar.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean, for introducing our topic and you and I today. So first off, we want to acknowledge that this is a really hard thing to work through. Separation, the restructuring of your family is incredibly can be incredibly stressful and difficult. So I'll share what I share with most people, which is we can't promise that we'll ever make anything easy or fun, but we try to help just get the best outcome possible, primarily for the kids. If we've chatted a few times, I might say, look, we'll try to make this suck as little as possible. So a lot of what the tips for coming up with workable parenting plans, are with that goal in mind. Let's get the best outcome possible for the kids and make this as sort of easy as possible on the parents in the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So very quickly, what's the background on the law with respect to parenting issues? So there are two, I might call buckets or categories of parenting issues. They are called decision making and parenting time. These used to be called custody and access in the legislation. Lots of people still use these words, custody and access. Custody, legal decision making meaning the kids can't sign themselves up for school or consent to healthcare treatments or those sorts of things. So those decisions have to be made for them. So who's making that decision? Is it one parent, both parents? In some cases, it's another family member or guardian. Okay, and there's parenting time. So this is what do the physical acts of day-to-day, week-to-week parenting look like? Who's doing drop-off and pickup and lunchtime and bath time and taking them to activities and extracurriculars and the doctor and the dentist and all these things. And that's typically where you might see online, that's your 225 or your 232 or your week on, week off. These are your schedules, right? We can get into some more, often we get into more details about, who's going to keep the passports and, those sorts of things. But broadly, when we say parenting, we're talking about two things. How are legal decisions going to get made for the children? And number two, where do they live? And what's the schedule like for each parent's time? Okay. There are a couple different kinds of decision making and a couple different kinds of parenting schedules, infinite, in fact, combinations of the two, right? And which one is best or right for your family is always going to be guided by what is in the best interests of the child. This, in a way, makes a ton of sense from a legal perspective, but it can also be really frustrating from a legal perspective because it doesn't give you a lot of guidance and it's highly case or fact specific. So when we say best interest of the child, we mean your child in your family in this context right now, based on what they're going through in their lives and based on what's going on in your lives. Okay. couple different ways to make decisions. One parent can be responsible, both parents can be responsible. We call that joint or shared decision making. That's very common, even if parenting time is split less equally, right? Parenting time schedules, I alluded to some of the options. It can be a week on, week off. It can be 2 days on, 3 days off, 2 days on, and then you switch the following week. You can make custom schedules based on your respective work schedules and school schedules. It really depends on what the kids are doing in their lives and what is best for them. A lot of misunderstandings still persist, certainly as it pertains to gender sometimes, but often there's an assumption that, well, kids live with mom. That very much used to be the case in maybe the 90s. It's changed quite a bit since then, and now parenting time and decision making is, again, comes back to what's in the best interest of the child, and that's generally understood these days to be as much time as possible with both, and as much of a role as possible with both parents. That doesn't mean automatically 50-50. I mean, if one parent works night shift, like, we'll have to be flexible, or if there are capacity or safety issues, they're not going to insist that the child be with that parent. Okay. The other important piece to consider is the child's age and their preference. So as the children get older, the law treats their wishes with more and more what we would say is called deference. So we would defer to what the kids want. Okay. A younger child who's less developmentally advanced might get upset and say, I want to go live with mom, and that might not require that to be the case. But the older a child gets, the more we have to listen to what their views and preferences are, because the more fully formed we expect them to be. So decision-making, parenting time, ideally, all of these issues are resolved in what we call a parenting plan. Parenting plan forms part of a separation agreement, or it can be a standalone document. It essentially becomes a contract. How are we going to co-parent together? And unless Sean wants to add anything else to the law without getting too technical or detailed, maybe Sean could tell us a little bit about what is co-parenting, and what does good co-parenting look like?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that when you're looking at the best interests of a child, it is a very case-by-case specific evaluation, and the legislation got updated a few years ago to reflect that, and there are a lot of different factors that go into that, and some people get confused and say, well, it's the best interest of the parents, but it is never in those circumstances. It really is looking at what a child's best interests are going to be, and sometimes that mirrors a parent's best interests, but we have to look at the legislation and the case law to kind of govern that. So like I said, it's very fact specific, and it really does depend on that specific child and that specific scenario when we're evaluating what is going to be in that kid's best interest for a parenting plan and for decision making. In terms of the big picture of what good co-parenting looks like, we talk about that a lot to our clients. I think some people can really get lost in the conflict and the emotion of separating, and they sometimes forget that you still have to co-parent with your former spouse while you are going through this separation. And especially if your children are young, you're going to be doing this for another 10, 20 years. So getting lost in the conflict really starts to negate any movement or forward movement that you can get to repair that relationship to continue to co-parent. So things that we look at when we're talking to our clients are good communication, being proactive, right? So when we talk about that, we talk about trying to look into the future with a bit of a crystal ball and anticipating maybe conflict that might be coming up surrounding a holiday or a vacation or a PA day or anything like that, and having those open conversations with that former spouse to ensure that you're not necessarily going to get to that day before and have to fight it out and figure out what's going to be happening for that specific holiday. So good communication is a really, really big thing. The other one is having a written document, having a parenting plan to fall back on. I find a lot of the people that are struggling to have a positive relationship with each other are the people that have their parenting plan on the back of a napkin, or they have it in their head and they've just been talking back and forth about it. We put these parenting plans in place so there is a default. If there is some type of conflict or if there is a concern, you at least have that document to go back to either negotiate on or to at least have somebody make a final decision on. And what I think the last thing that I really look at it that are good co-parents are, don't sweat the small stuff. People are going to parent each other's or your children differently. That's just the reality of human beings. And getting really annoyed with a minor decision is only going to set you up for a failure. I think that there's a situation where you have to be cognizant of the decisions that are being made, and you have to figure out whether it's worth engaging in a discussion about it or letting that slide, because those kind of incidents can start to compound frustration. And then again, you're starting to lose that co-parenting ability because of the frustration and the breakdown in communication. You always have to think about what is going to be in your kid's best interest when we're talking about this. And good parents always focus on that. They always think about what is going to be best for their child, not necessarily what's going to be best for the parent in those circumstances. And just being predictable, right? We want things to be predictable for the kids. Kids need a schedule. They need to know what is going on from day to day. Switching up the schedule all over the place makes it very difficult, especially children who have special needs. They need predictability. They need stability. So you need to really be, again, thinking about how are we going to structure this plan to give that stability and that predictability for the kids, to make sure that, again, they understand where they're going every Thursday, or who's driving them to hockey, or who's driving them to baseball. It is really important to deal with.
Yeah, I totally agree, Sean. I know we've both got toddlers, and we know that they do best when they know exactly what comes next, right? The biggest thing I'll add to that as well is, in my opinion, good co-parenting, kids don't notice it. They don't need to know what's happening with mom and dad. They only need, or both parents, I should say, sorry. They just need to know that their parents, their caregivers, whoever they are still a united front. They need that consistency, that predictability that Sean was talking about. And it's not going to be good for anybody if one parent is saying you can't have screens after 9, but the other parent doesn't care, or whatnot, because that's where you get the I'm going to go live with dad, I'm going to go live with mom. The parents resent each other, right? So parents have to find a way to still present that united front, to provide that consistency, that routine, and that predictability for the kids, and the kids are still going to feel, as far as they're concerned, they're not going to be subject to the conflict that comes up otherwise. Right? Kids do better with the least amount of conflict as possible, as do most of us, right? At least ideally, we have the opportunity to, work with therapists and then have hopefully develop, coping skills. But kids are still young; they're still working on those things. So it's doing whatever you got to do to find a way to work together. And I totally agree. Having a plan, having these difficult conversations with plenty of time, in advance, not sweating the small stuff. And that means, structure with flexibility. Like sometimes people are going to be late. Sometimes people are going to be sick, like talk about it in advance, have a plan, roll with it. And it's just going to be the best outcome for the kids that way.
Yeah. Ryan, in your practice, what do you typically see as common sources of conflict between parents that you can talk to the people here about, and maybe some strategies to avoid that?
Yeah, so I've got two that seem to have come up a lot for me recently, and I've started to allude to them. Different values, philosophies, approaches towards particularly two things: screens and health and well-being, right? So screens, that's the video game overuse or concerned overuse, right? These conversations never happened, right? Or it's an intensification of the roles that existed during the relationship. One parent was always the rule enforcer, one parent was always the fun person, right? So the fun person doesn't know necessarily how to be the rule enforcer, or understand the importance of being the rule enforcer, or maybe that's not the best word. Maybe boundary setter is more appropriate. Um, yeah, and these things come up on the fly, and when tensions are already heated. I had a parent recently so unbelievably stressed out about what's going on with their child, and then this issue pops up, and it's like the 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 straw on the camel's back, right? It's that last thing. All of a sudden, it's an explosion. It's a screaming fight in the hallway while their kids are at home, right? Ideally, these conversations have been had in advance. There are rules. They've been communicated clearly to the kids, or boundaries. They've been communicated clearly to the kids, and there's a dispute resolution mechanism in place. Here's how we're going to deal with these issues when they do come up, because sometimes random things are going to come up, like how do you deal with, I don't know, if they have a new partner that you don't like or something like that. It's hard to plan for these things, right? Very similar, different philosophies on health and well-being. We're fortunate to live in an era where we have a much more of an understanding on things like anxiety and neurodiversity, but there's still not universal understanding and awareness of how to of these matters, and how to navigate them. So typically, again, you'll have one parent who played that role of, well, I was the one that met with all the doctors, and I'm the one who has the individual education plan, and I'm the one who sits with them every night because my child has ADHD, and if I don't sit next to them, their work won't get done and they'll fall behind. And you don't even know that because you're not home or something. Like and that sort of leads to the biggest issue in my opinion in relationships, which is resentment, or an intensification of resentment. And that bleeds its way into these conversations of, well, no, you can't look after the kids during the week because you're not going to sit next to them, right? So these are the big things that I'm noticing pop up a lot for me recently. How about you, Sean?
I definitely see holidays and last minute changes in schedules being pretty high conflict sometimes, right? When there's an expectation that they're going to go to one parent's house and then all of a sudden they need to make a quick change, it makes it a bit more difficult, especially if plans are being made around the holidays. And I obviously money disputes are a big one too, right? When it's talking about extracurriculars and we're talking about either enrolling a person, but they can't actually pay for it, or they don't necessarily agree with the extracurricular. Those kind of conflicts can bleed into the parenting. And I see, unfortunately, people starting to bring both issues together in terms of the finances and the parenting time piece, and have a situation where it's going to be, I'm going to withhold my money, you're going to withhold my parenting time, and those should never go hand in hand, right? You as a parent should always have access to your kids. I mean, obviously subject to their best interests, but the financial pieces should never be indicative of how you deal with the parenting plan, right? That is a totally separate item, but it definitely starts to tangle this very difficult web together, and sometimes it's very difficult to untangle it because people are so reliant on that money, or they've agreed to do this and then someone backtracks. But it really does increase the conflict. And so those are kind of the two big things I'm seeing in addition to everything that you mentioned, Ryan, too. There's a lot of inconsistency in rules, and the FaceTime issue, or the screen time issues, and communication style. Some people, that's why they also separated, because communication was an issue, and maybe it never got fixed afterwards as well. And so you're kind of having to deal with the same person that you were once in a relationship with, but now you're separated and you still have to continue to communicate with this person. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it really is. So I ideally would put some guardrails, some practices in place to lean on when the difficulty arises, right? Sean, I think we have a pretty topical question right here about what happens if you have a final order with respect to a 12-year-old, or we'll call them a young adult, teenager, whatever you want, and that child is quite adamant that they do not want to spend time with the other parent. The questions are, well, what rights do I have? What rights does the child have? I'll maybe suggest I'll handle the first part of the question, and then Sean can maybe give some advice on what the legal process could look like. Obviously, we can't give legal advice, and we don't know the whole situation, right?
Mhm.
So one thing that I've found, very very interesting working in this area is that kids love their parents, and they want to often they love their parents, and whether it's because they love them or they feel pressure to, sometimes children will say what they think maybe the parent will want to hear. Um, Sometimes they don't know what to say. Sometimes they're repeating something they heard. And I find when I'm acting as a lawyer, I typically only have one side of the story. When I'm acting as a mediator, I get to sort of hear both, both experiences, right? So when there is a question of, what does the child want? As I mentioned, the law is going to offer more deference to that child's wishes. There's no hard rule in terms of age, and in my head, it's always sort of been like 12 and up. 12 is where you really start to get more deference. It's not a fixed age or anything like that. So if that's truly their preference, then that ought to be reflected in a change in parenting. The biggest issue and source of conflict here can be, well, what really is their preference? So from a process perspective, fighting over it, the two of you, is going to be really difficult, because it could be that the other parent is can't believe it. I mean, maybe they're hurt by it, or they have a complete, maybe they think the exact opposite is true. The child's told them that they don't want to see the other parent. So it can involve third parties. In a more intense litigation context, it's a formal voice of the child report. If you're working in a more collaborative process, we can typically work with a family professional who's just amazing at working with kids, and they'll give you an opinion. It's more informal. They'll help you work something out that's going to really help the kids and both parents and the relationship with both kids. I'm talking way too much, so I'll only just say on the legal piece to save Sean. I don't litigate anymore, so the process isn't exactly pleasant. But if you have a final order, you'd have to get the order varied, and to do so, you'd have to go through the formal process of getting these reports and fighting over it in court. So ideally, you can go to something like mediation with a parenting mediator, or even something more binding like parenting coordination. So, anything to add to that, Sean?
Yeah, I would add the process would technically be a motion to change. The When you have a final order in place, you have to vary the order, just like Ryan said. 12 years old is an interesting time, because the court does recognize that their views and preferences are relevant, but they're still kind of on the young age to really dictate exactly what the court should decide. Obviously, they will be, like I said, one factor based on many other factors that are going to come into the fold. But if there's full-blown panic attacks, this is a situation where maybe even more so than just a voice of the child might be required. It could be what we call a Section 30 assessment. If you do it privately, it's pretty expensive, but usually the Section 30 assessment actually looks at everything holistically, including medical reports. It looks at the parents' potential psychological impact on the kids. It could look at parenting time. It could look at other third-party information or medical disclosure that they might have. And they actually provide recommendations about what the parenting plan and decision making should look like. The voice of the child report is really just expressing the child's views and preferences, so that a court can obviously look at what they would like as being a factor. They don't actually provide recommendations. So a Section 30 is kind of the bigger one that you go to get those actual recommendations from a trained therapist that is trained to do these specific reports to provide information. Some lawyers do Section 30 assessments as well, but usually I see them being as social workers or psychologists or people of that vein. And then on top of that, the other option is, if you were in court in a motion to change, you could apply to have the OCL involved, which is the Office of the Children's Lawyer. And that would be a lawyer initially to represent your child and also express the views and preferences of that child during that proceeding. The interesting thing that can be done as well is that the OCL can also appoint a clinician to do that same report for you. And it's kind of the way to sort of get around paying for it privately. The OCL will fund those reports for you, but you have to be approved. It has to be a court order from a judge saying that the OCL should be involved. And then it's up to the discretion of the OCL in general to determine whether that child needs a lawyer, that child needs a clinician to offer up a report. They need both. It really is going to be dependent on that strategy. So those are your options. The hardest thing that we have to tell our clients, and I was actually speaking to somebody in a very similar scenario like this last week, but as the parent, especially with an order in place, you are obligated to comply with that order. And I know that is the hardest thing a parent wants to hear, because from a common sense perspective, it's so difficult to put your child in harm's way. I don't want to do it either, but there are orders are in place for a reason. And so a judge would tell you to comply with this order as best as you possibly can. That is why you have the mechanism of going to court to bring that motion to change, to try to vary that order based on all the material change in circumstances, which could be these panic attacks, or could be whatever other reasons might be behind it. Even again, the child's age, and they're getting older and expressing their views. All of those kind of things are important, but it is very difficult to remain not in compliance with an order, because there are ramifications associated with that. You can have a fine, you can get fined, you could have certain rights or obligations taken away. They could shift the parenting to the other parent potentially. They could actually jail you. I'm not saying that that's going to be the first case, but the court has mechanisms to enforce orders if you don't remain compliant. So what I always highlight is, try your best to be compliant, but move forward as fast as you can with the next stage to vary that order, to make that more meaningful for the child as you're moving forward. And you can always look at additional avenues, right? You could still try to mediate that if you want. Usually if you have a final order, it's likely because maybe someone was high conflict, or there was a disagreement, and maybe mediation might not be beneficial. But it is going to be the fastest way for you to try to change that order. A motion to change still takes anywhere between 6 months to a year, if not even longer, to get to a final resolution. So you're going to have to find some temporary solution or some way of shifting that in the meantime before you get to that final court process. So just be mindful of that. But really the big two takeaways are: try to comply as best as you can, but get that variation proceeding moving forward, and try to get the right people involved to express your child's views and preferences.
So ideally avoiding court to the extent possible. That's really what we're here to talk about. So having these strategies, in place, these parenting plans in place, these professionals in place, in advance. I realize that's not going to help the person asking the question. They already have a final order, but ideally, if possible, these things can help, keep you out of court, if necessary, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is a great time to chat about some conflict reduction strategies. I might also call these conflict avoidance or cooling off strategies. I love talking about these things. I've got 3 or 4 that I'm really enjoy chatting about. So the first one I would suggest is cultivating some form, and this is unique to everybody, but cultivating some form of self-awareness, self-understanding. You might call it mindfulness. Whatever it is to you. It's knowing yourself and knowing what's gonna, cause your heart rate to go through the roof, or your palms to start sweating, or yourself to start yelling and screaming into a pillow, or whatever it looks like for you. You're having a heightened fight or flight, reaction. Sometimes it's literally anything the other spouse says or does. Maybe it's particular things, that they say or do. So I think trying to cultivate that understanding is going to be a huge first step to navigating the conflict if and when it does come up, it's also going to help a lot with putting into practice the other tools that I have to suggest. Again, this looks different for everybody. Some people it's therapy, some people it's journaling, some people it's going for a walk and just chatting out loud to themselves, or doing a meditation on their phone or something like that. It's whatever you can do to cultivate that understanding and to help lower your heart rate when needed. And for what it's worth, I've been working on this for 20 years, so it's really hard. But it does help the implementation of what is called the BIFF method. I did not come up with this. BIFF, B-I-F-F, stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So any communication with the other person, you just limit it to whatever fits those 4 criteria. So, for example, you get an email or a text saying, well, you've already ruined my life enough, so yeah, I guess you're trying to still do it some more. What do you want to do about soccer or music this weekend? Brief means don't respond with an essay about how they ruined your life, or whatever. Informative means keep strictly to the information necessary to resolve the issue or to make a decision. So in this case, soccer at 2, music at 1, whatever the case may be. Friendly, again, that means not engaging and responding like, hey, jerk face or something like that. It's just hello or good day, thank you for your response. And then signing off, thank you, or just your name. It's just not going further than the minimum. And firm, it's not open for, it's a clear communication of your position. So in response to that email, maybe your answer is, I'm taking care of my mother in the morning. I will come by at 12:30 to take child A to their lesson or activity or whatever it is at 1. Please let me know if that does not work for you. Thank you. It's brief. You just, here are the facts. This is all you need to know. It's informative. This is what's going on, and it's friendly in the sense that at least it wasn't rude, and it's firm. There's no room for that to be negotiated. I'm not saying, unless you have a better idea, or opening it up to further discussion. Okay. A lot of times that's going to help people sort of just stop right there. By sending an email like that first person did, that's bait. It's trying to get into an altercation. You don't take the bait, the altercation's likely to fizzle out, more likely to fizzle out. Okay. I'll stick with one more tool while we're talking, but active listening and conveying some sense of understanding to the other person is an incredibly powerful tool. It is extremely difficult when you are the person in the confrontation because you're having these physiological responses. But to the extent possible, if you can communicate to someone that you understand their concerns, they're more likely to be calm themselves and rational and logical, themselves. So I've had instances where I've had clients who are yelling to me, not at me, but to me, about what's going on in their life. And if I can say to them, hey, it's sounding to me like, when you were at that mediation session, the mediator was really trying to tell you what to do and not really hearing, that you were concerned about the homework or whatever the case may be. And there's something that can happen, there's something clicks and someone goes, oh, like, yes, like, thank you. You get it. I could not fix that problem. There's nothing I could do, but the person felt like progress had been made because at least I got it, and they weren't, they could get out of the pattern of worrying, like, am I crazy? Like, what was that? You know what I mean? So if really hard to do, but if you can do that in the throes of a conflict, it'll help you get at, okay, well, here's what they're really concerned about. They don't want that golf club. It's not about that. You know what I mean? It's about, they're worried the kids don't like them as much. Okay, if I can say that to you, hey, it sounds like, you're worried about your relationship with the kids. They might say, yeah, actually, yeah. And maybe that helps you soften a little bit and make some concessions, or maybe that helps them say, you know what, like, I see that you feel the same thing. Like let's work on this together. So those are my big tools: brief, informative, friendly, firm, and some active listening.
I've got a few more too, I think, and then we can move on. But the number one don't use your kids as a messenger, right? Don't put them in the middle of the conflict. They should always be totally outside of this. I think that's an important thing to remember, that regardless of how old they are, they should not be the person that's conveying messages back and forth to each other, or bringing notes to each other about the separation or anything after like that. So that is just a big don't, and just make sure you remind yourself about that. The other ones that you can think about are there are other third parties, not just lawyers, that can help you, and there are apps. There are parenting apps that you can actually use to help you move forward. The third parties that you can use mediators, like Ryan was just talking about. You can use what we call a parenting coordinator, who is somebody who is generally trained to interpret your parenting plan. Most will offer up some type of mediation service to try to help you come to a resolution, and most will also be arbitrators, which, failing you two coming to a decision together, they can make a decision on a small point, right? So, and an example could be an extracurricular, how whether it's reasonable or necessary, or maybe a makeup day for a vacation or something like that. That's in your parenting plan. They won't change things holistically. They won't say, okay, we're gonna uproot this parenting plan from a 2-day on, 3-day off to a week on, week off situation, but they're there to help you with the communication issues and some of the minor issues. And then there are other people like parenting coaches or co-parenting counselors, or even therapists for yourself, that you can actually lean on to either role play or to talk things out with them. So, if you get this really angry message and you're about to blow up, to go back to that person and send this really snarky email, maybe consider talking to that third party first to clear your head, have a conversation about it, and come up with an appropriate response based on that BIF model that Ryan just mentioned. And the other one too is, like I said, these parenting apps. The parenting apps are great because they will hold people accountable, because there's a record. You actually can make, depending on the app, but you can make audio calls and you can make video calls through the app. They can be recorded. So again, there's accountability on both sides. They have written transcripts of calls. You can send documents back and forth. You can have calendars. You can actually deal with Section 7 expenses, like dealing with apportioning out therapy costs or the school uniform or whatever it might be. It keeps everything consolidated in one app, and it really helps people kind of streamline communication and avoid having to have text messages versus emails versus pigeon, sending things back and forth to have conversations about. So they are really helpful, especially when there's a bit of a breakdown in communication, that you can use these apps to consolidate communication and document management, and calendaring for your kids. So those are really great opportunities to avoid the pitfalls that we really see on a regular basis.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing with the apps is you can add your lawyers and your mediators and your parenting coordinators. It's like a little ecosystem for everything to do with co-parenting, and it just it means that maybe you don't have to email each other or talk on the phone, which maybe communication was historically an issue. So there are a lot of different tools and processes that are out there. Some good lawyers, what my definition of good will tell you what those are and explain the other options. And not every lawyer believes in this type of approach. So my advice would also be like, ask around, look for other services, talk to other professionals, and get lots of different sort of recommendations. There's a question about which app or apps to use. I think Our Family Wizard is probably the most popular one, probably the best one. Is that in your experience, Sean? Do you agree?
Yeah, but it's also the most expensive. So
Right.
the trade-off there. It is kind of the gold standard, and it's really been adopted and recognized by courts as being kind of the best, but you do end up paying maybe sometimes $200 to $300 a year to use it from a subscription. So there actually are a lot of newer apps that are coming into the fold that are a little bit cheaper. Maybe they're not as great, or they can be pretty similar, but I do believe there's two houses which I know for sure. It's a little bit of a smaller fee. AppClose, AppClose is a free one that a lot of people have been using lately. Talking Parents is another one. Some of these are Canadian, some of them are American. It really just depends on your preference, but they kind of do the same thing. But my general preference is our Family Wizard, just because, again, it is the most robust, but I obviously can recognize that people have a budget, and most of these do a very similar task. But the one thing I really like about our Family Wizard, it also has a conflict meter when there's communication. So it'll flag to you using AI that maybe this is should be reworded because it's coming off a bit strong, or it's coming off as too adversarial, and maybe you want to highlight and tone down your correspondence to hopefully keep things a little bit lower. That's kind of on a higher tier. Obviously, it's not on the lower subscriptions, but yeah, there's a lot of great apps out there to use.
Awesome. There's also a question about dealing with a parent who's a narcissist. I might expand the question to include just a variety of diagnosed personality disorders that can make conflict and cooperation more challenging. I think you're unlikely to change this person. So maybe active listening and helping them, or working to understand their concerns might not be the best, because it's always going to be difficult to know whether they're real or you're they're manipulating you. I'm a firm believer in BIF, the BIF method, especially with these types of personalities. Engaging in conflict, justifying, arguing is not going to be productive. It's only going to be draining for you, because they're just by definition never going to be able to see your side, right? I also don't pretend to be a mental health expert, so I'm relying on my team to the extent that I can, right? If I'm lucky to be working in a collaborative process, it's a trained mental health professional, who can navigate these issues. If I'm alone, I'm the lawyer, and we're just negotiating with the other lawyer because they don't agree to work within a more collaborative process, then candidly, I'm working with my own mental health professional, to remind myself of my own boundaries. It can be incredibly challenging and difficult with certain high conflict personality types. Ultimately, there's a specific question about not really cooperating with the process. My approach personally, I'm not saying this is the correct answer, but I'm a big fan of the ramp up approach. I start with a gentle invitation to participate in a collaborative process. I follow up, and then I start to get maybe a little bit more direct. And ultimately, if someone will not participate, then they've really only left you with one option, which is to commence a court application and force them to respond, force them to the table, basically. Ideally, you can sort of say, hey, we really want to avoid that, so can you get back to me by next Friday? If not, then I will have to. And sometimes that inspires some action, but if still not, then unfortunately, you're really only stuck with one option. We can't make anybody do anything, especially people with certain personality disorders.
Yeah.
Right? So
my little advice that I always tell clients, people who are high conflict or diagnosed narcissists, you have to let them think they're winning the small ones, so you end up winning the big battle at the end. And so what I mean by that is give them small wins so they feel like they're in control and they're winning, but tailor it so you get your ultimate end goal, right? So if the situation is that you need, or your main pillar or your goal is to get sole decision making or primary residence, give up certain things that are smaller to let you get what your main goal is. You have to understand they're unfortunately, they're win at all costs. Like that really is their mentality. So you have to find ways to think about that, and then also think about the cost benefit on everything, right? That going to court costs tens of thousands of dollars, and so you have to find that delicate balance between getting what you need and what you want versus how much it's actually going to cost you to enforce or deal with this person. And just to what Ryan said, you're not going to change them. Like, that's just the reality of who they are. So you have to try to really find a solution knowing the personality that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point as well, Sean. You approach negotiations a little bit differently. I'm usually a little bit more of a straight to the point kind of person, but with certain personality types, I might say, well, offer more, because they'll feel like they got you down, or they negotiated you down. Some little things like that, right?
Yeah, I agree. Ryan, I think I wouldn't mind opening up the floor to more questions if people have them, and they can send it through the chat. We were going to talk about structuring a parenting plan, and we can do that briefly while more further questions come in. And I see one that we can answer as well. But we did want to let you guys know too that we're going to attach as a thank you email after this the recording. So in case you ever want to go back to review this, you can go back and look at the full recording of the webinar. But we're also going to attach what we call it's called the AFCCO parenting guidelines. And what that guideline is, and it's a guide that was developed by a whole slew of practitioners all over Ontario, with consultation with the courts, with consultation with legal practitioners, mental health practitioners. They have curated this guide for people and for lawyers and for judges to look at, that offers up really great guidance on how you can structure a parenting plan. And it is age specific. It really does depend on people's circumstances and different types of arrangements ahead while living together, how people raise their children at that time, who was a primary caregiver versus not. It talks about vacations. It talks about makeup time, exchanges, everything like that you could think about. It is a really great tool that the courts are starting to actually interpret and agree with a lot of the language and information that's in there and adopt into their decisions. And I think if you're struggling to think about options for yourself, this guide will be a really great tool to start thinking about and opening up a dialogue with your spouse about how to draft or how to come up with a parenting plan. And I generally, when I'm starting with a client, I always send this guide to them so they can wrap their head around what a parenting plan is going to look like. So then we can have a better dialogue about that conversation. So we'll make sure we send that as well. And I think that'll hopefully help you out. On that topic though, Ryan, do you want to talk about the issue of transitions and exchanges and how you can minimize conflict doing that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So this is where the parenting plan, or the custom terms of a parenting plan, are going to be, really helpful. So ideally, let's say I'm mediating, I'd really like to understand, the patterns, like what has happened previously. Is it that one parent arrives on time to pick up the children, but the kids are never ready. Their bags aren't packed. They're not bathed or fed or anything like that. Or is it that the parents just can't see each other because they can't not exchange some nasty words, or maybe maybe there's a history of abuse, and even just seeing the other person or being close to the other person is highly upsetting and triggering. So I really want to understand, first of all, like what's been happening and what is underlying the concerns or the conflict around these handoffs. And then we can start to get super creative, ideally, right? So the easiest one, and this certainly depends on the age of the children and what they're doing, is for transitions to happen at school, right? So instead of having a transition on a Saturday or a Sunday, you move it to the Friday or whatever it is. And the outgoing parent drops them off at school, the incoming parent picks them up at school. They never have to really cross paths. You make sure that the kids have duplicate items in both households so that they're never like, oh man, like my video game thing is at my other parents, or it can be a little more expensive to have duplicate items, but at least you really rarely ever have to see the person. It's not going to deal with everything because there are still going to be PA days um, and weekends and holidays potentially, right?
Yeah.
Other options could be public transitions. If it's a fear of being alone, or a strong discomfort with going to the other person's house or the other person, coming to your home. Parking lots are fairly common. A shopping mall is easy. There's always people, there's always people around. Things like that. I've had issues come up with things, right? There's a bag. They did the great work of figuring out that the kids each have a bag and it's got certain defined items that always go back and forth. But one parent wasn't making the bag available because they weren't home after school and the kids couldn't take it to school. So in that case, we figured out that okay, there aren't safety issues, it's not a privacy issue. Like let's share the cost of a lockbox and we'll stick it, back behind the house or something like that, and make sure that the bag ends up in the lockbox before school that day. And if, I mean, look, things happen. Sometimes we forget, we're rushing, whatever, and if for whatever reason that parent isn't able to get the bag into the lockbox, then it's their responsibility to drive it to the other person's, when they get home from work. So there we create sort of a system as well as an incentive to follow that system. And I mean, that's just one example of the sort of infinite issues that can come up in solutions, to those issues. Yeah, Sean, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say one positive and one negative. My general rule: do not do police stations. People think that that's the best place to do transitions and exchanges. And if you walked into court and you told a judge that you did your exchanges in front of the police station, wherever you might live, they are going to give you a mouthful. It is likely the worst place that you could think of optically to make a decision to do that, regardless of if you think that there is some type of threat to your safety or whatever have you. I can appreciate that optically you feel like that will be safer, but the reality is the police are not going to get involved unless you actually have some type of altercation. You could still theoretically call 911 if something was going to happen like that. But the last thing your child wants is to see an exchange in front of cops or in front of a police station. So I think that is something you need to think about. It's not an ideal scenario. One other way that we have, if there is significant conflict, is again, depending on the age of the child, but we just simply make the dropping off parent stay in the car. And it's the child gets out of the car on the driveway, walks up to the next house. Or, if it's two cars, they unbuckle the seatbelt, just the child gets out of the car, that parent stays in the car, and then the receiving parent steps out of the car, and there's a transition there. The idea really is that you don't have to talk to each other, right? There needs to be some space between the two of you. If there really is that large amount of conflict, or you're trying to minimize it, really the goal should just be that neither one of you really have to talk to each other face to face. And how do we think about doing that? Public settings are great. If you need a witness, sure. Or the transition simply is the child gets out of the car, but you stay in the car, and the receiving parent gets out and receives them 10 steps away from the car. Or again, it's a driveway and walks up to the house, you wave from the car and you say goodbye. And we're just reducing that one-on-one interaction between the spouses.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think what I forgot to mention, and this is really important, is that everything we've just mentioned assumes that there are no court orders in place. Some people are not allowed to be within a certain distance of each other, or to contact each other in any way. And if that's happening, and sometimes if conflict is really extreme, and depending on the age of the child, again, there are centers, like they're technically called supervised access centers, but they can also be used for transitions. There are some publicly funded centers, but can be tricky to get into. But there are also some private options too. Like there are counselors and psychologists that offer this. So essentially, what happens is the outgoing parent drops their kids off and leaves, and the parenting professionals there ensure the child is safe. They usually just play with them or watch them play. And then the next parent arrives, and the arrival and drop off are staggered, so that the dropping off parent has more than enough time to leave. And sometimes it's through a different exit or entrance, and one person comes through the back. One, they organize these transitions depending on the unique safety profile. So if that's the case, those options exist. There are always some options like that. Okay. There's a question about signing up for our newsletter or more webinars. If you signed up for this webinar, then you'll automatically get put on our mailing list. So we'll invite you to future webinars. You can opt out at any time, of course. And I'm going to reply privately with a link to our website, but it's ovfamilylaw.com if you're looking for more information, or if you want to chat with either of us sometime about the prospect of potentially working together, collaborating. So.
Yeah, and our follow-up thank you with the AFCCO guideline, as well as the recording. We'll have links to our social media accounts. We'll have links to our website as well. And we do have a great blog on there where we usually post I think twice every month about new topics that come up that are really relevant. And we encourage you guys to read that information. Our approach is really to offer up guidance and help to people, not just necessarily from a legal perspective, but just how you guys can co-parent and how you can continue this relationship post-separation, because we know life is tough and we know that you still have to continue to co-parent with these individuals. And so that is really our hope. And again, at the end of the day, if you do have any further questions and you do want to reach out, you can reach out to either Ryan or myself, and we can guide you through the process or discuss next steps on how we might be able to help you transition and move forward with your separation or with your co-parenting difficulties.
Yeah. So I think this is a great time, unless any questions come in, I think this is a great time to wrap it up, and hopefully people can have a bit of a walk around before whatever they have to do at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much to everybody for attending. It was a real delight for Sean and I to chat about these points, and hopefully provide a bit of assurance that even though these issues are extremely difficult, there are paths forward, and lots of great people, obviously Sean and I, but lots of people out there who are it can be really helpful. So I hope everyone has a great day, and stay well, and thanks, Sean, for the great conversation.
No problem. You too, Ryan. All right, take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye for now.